They called her just the help. But the black waitress signed the papers as the billionaire boss. The crystal wine glasses clinked with arrogant precision as Tasha Williams refilled them for the third time, her black uniform making her invisible to the men in $1,000 suits who discussed the acquisition of her company as if she were furniture expendable, replaceable, and certainly not worth acknowledging as they plotted to steal everything she'd spent 15 years building from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. The mahogany conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling building buzzed with the kind of casual cruelty that wealthy white men wielded like inherited weapons, their voices carrying across imported Italian marble as they dissected Williams Industries' financial projections, while the woman who'd created every dollar of value served them wine and endured their assumptions about her intelligence, her worth, and her place in hierarchies they'd never questioned, because privilege had taught them that success belonged to people who looked like them. At 38, Tasha had mastered the art of strategic invisibility that allowed her to observe without being observed, to gather intelligence while appearing to serve, and to position herself for moments when underestimation would become their greatest weakness and her most powerful advantage. The waitress uniform she wore was costume rather than identity, designed to provide access to conversations and decisions that shaped her empire while maintaining the element of surprise that would soon transform their predatory confidence into devastating shock. The stakes couldn't have been higher for everyone in that room, though only Tasha understood the true dynamics of what was unfolding. Marcus Sterling, the real estate mogul attempting to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Williams Industries, had spent months planning an acquisition that would add her company to his portfolio, while eliminating what he considered an irritating example of minority business success that challenged assumptions about who deserved to control serious wealth and market influence. What Sterling and his team of lawyers and financial advisors didn't know what their due diligence and corporate intelligence had somehow failed to discover was that the waitress refilling their wine glasses was Tasha Williams herself, the founder and CEO of the company they were attempting to steal through legal maneuvers that depended on her continued absence from negotiations that would determine the future of everything she'd sacrificed to build. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Men who'd built careers on information warfare and strategic intelligence were being outmaneuvered by someone they'd dismissed as domestic help, whose presence in their private planning sessions was providing her with real-time intelligence about their tactics, timelines, and the specific legal vulnerabilities they intended to exploit in their attempt to seize control of her life's work. If you find value in real stories told with clarity and truth, make sure to subscribe to stay informed with Real Father Story. The Williams woman is proving more elusive than anticipated, Sterling muttered to his chief legal counsel Richard Blackstone as Tasha arranged fresh documents on the conference table with movements so smooth and professional that they reinforced her invisibility to men who'd never learned to see service workers as complete human beings with intelligence and agency. Blackstone shuffled through contracts that outlined their acquisition strategy, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never failed to acquire what he wanted through legal procedures that favored wealth over justice. She'll surface eventually. People like her always need money more than they need pride. We just need to apply enough pressure to make cooperation seem like her only viable option. The "people like her" comment revealed assumptions about race class and business competence that shaped their entire approach to acquiring Williams Industries. They'd convinced themselves that a black woman couldn't possibly have built a legitimate billion-dollar company without assistance, luck, or market conditions that had temporarily elevated her beyond her natural capabilities and social position. Tasha continued serving wine while mentally cataloging every detail of their conversation: legal strategies, financial pressure points, timeline for implementation, and the specific individuals responsible for each aspect of their attempted theft. Her Harvard MBA and 15 years of corporate leadership had taught her to think systematically about complex problems. But her childhood in Detroit's most challenging neighborhoods had taught her to survive by being underestimated while gathering intelligence that could be weaponized when circumstances required strategic retaliation. Williams Industries had started in Tasha's studio apartment with $3,000 in savings and a business plan that identified market opportunities in logistics and supply chain management that larger companies had overlooked because they served communities and businesses that corporate America had systematically ignored. Her first contracts had been with minority-owned restaurants and retail establishments that needed efficient delivery services but couldn't afford the premium rates that established logistics companies charged for basic transportation and warehousing. The company had grown through relentless customer service, innovative technology, and Tasha's ability to identify underserved markets where her commitment to excellence could create competitive advantages over established players who'd grown complacent through decades of market dominance. Williams Industries now employed over 1,200 people, operated in 16 states, and had generated consistent profits that had made Tasha one of the wealthiest black women in American business. But success had also made her a target for predators like Sterling, who viewed minority business achievement as temporary aberration that could be corrected through acquisition manipulation or destruction that would restore natural order where serious wealth remained concentrated among people who looked like them and shared their assumptions about who deserved to control economic power. The beauty of this approach, Sterling continued, his voice carrying satisfaction that made Tasha's jaw clench as she maintained perfect service posture while plotting his professional destruction, is that we can acquire her assets without paying full market value. Financial pressure combined with legal challenges will force her to accept our offer or risk losing everything through bankruptcy proceedings that could leave her with nothing. The strategy was sophisticated extortion disguised as legitimate business practice. Create artificial financial crises through frivolous lawsuits and regulatory challenges while offering acquisition terms that would provide Sterling with billion-dollar assets at discount prices that reflected distress rather than actual value. Thomas Chen Sterling's financial advisor spread spreadsheets across the table that detailed Williams Industries' quarterly performance cash flow projections and debt obligations that could be manipulated through legal pressure to create liquidity crises that would force Tasha into negotiations from position of weakness rather than strength. Her company is solid, Chen admitted with reluctance that suggested professional respect for achievements he couldn't dismiss, despite racial biases that made Tasha's success inconvenient for their narrative about minority business competence. Profit margins are impressive, customer retention rates exceed industry standards, and her operational efficiency actually surpasses most companies we've analyzed in this sector. The acknowledgement of Williams Industries' excellence revealed the contradiction at the heart of their acquisition strategy. They wanted to steal her company precisely because she'd built something valuable, not because it was failing or vulnerable through legitimate business weaknesses. All the more reason to acquire it quickly. Sterling replied, his logic revealing the predatory capitalism that had built his fortune through acquiring other people's achievements rather than creating value through innovation or superior service. Companies like this don't come available often. We need to move aggressively before she finds adequate legal representation or attracts other buyers who might complicate our timeline. Tasha refilled Sterling's wine glass while calculating legal countermeasures that would transform their predatory strategy into career-ending disaster for everyone involved in attempting to steal her life's work. Her company's legal team included some of the most effective corporate attorneys in Boston. But more importantly, she'd spent years building relationships with regulatory agencies, community organizations, and political leaders who understood the importance of protecting minority business success from exactly the kind of sophisticated theft that Sterling was orchestrating. The waitress uniform that made her invisible also provided perfect cover for intelligence gathering that would inform counterattack strategies designed to expose their attempted theft, while protecting Williams Industries from legal and financial manipulation that had destroyed other minority-owned businesses that had lacked resources or advance warning necessary to mount effective resistance. "What about regulatory complications?" asked Sarah Morrison Sterling's compliance officer, her voice carrying concern about government oversight that might interfere with acquisition procedures that pushed ethical and legal boundaries in pursuit of assets they couldn't acquire through legitimate competitive methods. Sterling's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Regulatory agencies don't pay attention to transactions involving minority businesses unless someone makes it a political issue. And who's going to advocate for a woman who's been too proud or too stubborn to accept our generous offers for partnership and cooperation?" The comment revealed assumptions about political influence and regulatory capture that reflected Sterling's confidence in systems that historically had protected white wealth while failing to defend minority business interests from predatory acquisition strategies that government agencies had been unwilling or unable to prevent. But Sterling's assumptions were based on outdated information about Tasha's political connections and regulatory relationships that had expanded significantly as Williams Industries had grown into major employer and taxpayer, whose success had attracted attention from elected officials who understood the importance of protecting minority business achievement from exactly the kind of sophisticated theft that Sterling was planning. Tasha had spent years building alliances with state legislators, federal regulators, and community organizations that monitored corporate behavior for patterns of discrimination and predatory practices that targeted minority-owned businesses for acquisition or destruction. Her intelligence network extended far beyond the corporate lawyers and financial advisors that Sterling assumed would provide adequate protection for his attempted theft. "The timeline needs to be accelerated," Blackstone said, reviewing contracts that outlined phases of legal and financial pressure designed to force Tasha into negotiations within 60 days. "Every day we delay gives her more opportunities to organize resistance or find alternative funding sources that could complicate our acquisition strategy." The urgency revealed their understanding that success depended on speed and surprise legal and financial attacks that would overwhelm Tasha's resources before she could mount effective counterattacks that might expose their tactics to regulatory scrutiny or public attention that could turn their private acquisition into political controversy. But their timeline assumptions were based on incomplete intelligence about Tasha herself, her resources, and her strategic capabilities that had been developed through 15 years of building and defending a company in business environments that had never welcomed her success or assumed she deserved the wealth and influence she'd earned through superior performance and customer service. The conference room fell silent as Sterling's assistant entered with documents that required signatures to implement the first phase of their acquisition strategy. Legal papers that would initiate frivolous lawsuits, regulatory complaints, and financial challenges designed to create artificial crises that would force Tasha into distressed sale negotiations. "These documents will begin the process," Sterling announced to his team with satisfaction that revealed how much he enjoyed using legal systems to steal other people's achievements. "By tomorrow morning, Williams Industries will be facing multiple crises that will require immediate attention and significant legal expenses that should exhaust her resources within weeks." Tasha continued serving wine while memorizing every detail of documents that outlined their attack strategy, noting filing dates, legal theories, and specific claims that she could counter through evidence and witnesses they hadn't discovered, because their investigation had focused on financial vulnerabilities rather than operational excellence that had made her company resistant to the kind of disruption they were planning. The satisfaction they displayed while plotting her company's destruction was motivating rather than intimidating. Tasha had faced worse odds during her company's early years when established competitors had tried to destroy her through price wars, customer theft, and regulatory harassment that had failed because her service quality and customer loyalty had made Williams Industries stronger through adversity. "Gentlemen," Sterling said, as he prepared to sign documents that would initiate their attempted theft. "This acquisition will not only add significant value to our portfolio, but will demonstrate that success in business comes from strategic thinking and aggressive execution, rather than social programs and diversity initiatives that artificially elevate unqualified individuals." The comment revealed racial animosity that had motivated their acquisition strategy as much as financial opportunity. Sterling wanted to steal her company not just for profit, but to prove that black business success was temporary aberration that could be corrected through superior white intelligence and ruthless competition that would restore natural economic hierarchies. But as Sterling reached for his pen to sign documents that would begin their attack on Williams Industries, Tasha stepped forward with quiet confidence that had been developed through 15 years of proving herself in business environments that had never expected her to succeed. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Tasha said, her voice carrying authority that had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar contracts while these men had been planning her destruction. "I believe there's been some confusion about who has signing authority for decisions involving Williams Industries." The transformation was instantaneous and devastating. The invisible waitress became visible as the most powerful person in the room, her presence shifting from background service to center stage authority that left Sterling and his team stunned into silence as they processed the implications of her identity and their massive strategic miscalculation. "I'm Tasha Williams," she continued, removing the service apron that had concealed her identity while providing perfect intelligence gathering opportunity. "Founder and CEO of Williams Industries, and I believe you've been discussing the acquisition of my company without bothering to invite me to the negotiations." The revelation hit the room like an explosion that shattered every assumption they'd made about her identity, intelligence, and business capabilities. The woman they'd dismissed as domestic help was revealed as the entrepreneur they'd underestimated, the business leader they'd attempted to outmaneuver, and the strategic thinker who'd been observing their every move while they'd planned her professional destruction. Sterling's face drained of color as he realized the magnitude of their exposure. Not only had their entire acquisition strategy been compromised, but they'd revealed their tactics timeline and specific legal vulnerabilities to the very person they'd been attempting to destroy through surprise attacks that now had no possibility of success. "This is impossible," Blackstone stammered, his legal mind struggling to process how their intelligence gathering had failed so completely that they'd spent hours discussing theft strategies in front of their intended victim. "Our research showed that Tasha Williams was unavailable for meetings traveling internationally on business that would keep her out of the country for weeks." Tasha's smile was sharp and satisfied as she produced business cards that confirmed her identity, while revealing the sophistication of intelligence operations that had allowed her to monitor their activities while they'd remained oblivious to her presence and preparation for exactly the kind of predatory acquisition they'd been planning. "I find that the best business intelligence comes from direct observation." Tasha explained, her tone professional, but carrying undertones of satisfaction at having outmaneuvered opponents who'd assumed racial superiority would compensate for strategic incompetence. "Wearing a waitress uniform provides remarkable access to confidential conversations that people conduct when they assume service workers lack intelligence or agency." The strategy revealed business acumen that exceeded anything Sterling's team had demonstrated while they'd been planning theft. Through legal manipulation, she'd been gathering intelligence through strategic invisibility that had provided complete knowledge of their tactics, timeline, and personnel, while maintaining perfect operational security that had kept her preparation hidden until the moment when revelation would cause maximum damage to their position. "You've been recording us?" Chen accused, his voice carrying panic about legal exposure that could result from conversations they'd assumed were private and protected from scrutiny that might reveal their predatory intentions to regulatory agencies or law enforcement. "I don't need recordings," Tasha replied, tapping her temple with gesture that indicated perfect memory retention that had cataloged every detail of their conversation for use in legal proceedings that would expose their attempted theft to appropriate authorities. 15 years of business negotiations have taught me to remember every word of important conversations, especially when they involve attempts to steal my life's work through fraudulent legal procedures. The conference room fell into stunned silence as Sterling's team processed the complete reversal of their strategic position from predators to prey, from hunters to hunted, from confident acquisition specialists to exposed criminals whose attempted theft had been documented by their intended victim. "What do you want?" Sterling asked, his voice carrying defeat that acknowledged Tasha's complete tactical victory and their desperate need for damage control that might prevent total destruction of their careers and reputations. Tasha's response was delivered with calm authority that commanded respect, while demonstrating business sophistication that had built billion-dollar success through excellence rather than theft. "I want you to understand that Williams Industries is not available for acquisition at any price through any means, legal or otherwise. I also want you to understand that attempting to steal minority-owned businesses will result in consequences that extend far beyond failed acquisitions." She reached into her briefcase and produced documents that revealed the extent of her preparation for exactly this kind of predatory attack. Legal injunctions that would prevent their frivolous lawsuits, regulatory complaints that would trigger investigations into their business practices, and media contacts that would ensure their attempted theft became public knowledge that would damage their reputations and business relationships. "These are preliminary injunctions that will be filed within the hour," Tasha explained, distributing copies to stunned lawyers who realized their acquisition strategy had been anticipated and countered before implementation could begin. "They will prevent any legal actions against Williams Industries while regulatory agencies investigate your attempted manipulation of legal systems for theft purposes." The documents revealed legal preparation that exceeded anything Sterling's team had developed comprehensive research into their tactics, evidence of their predatory intentions, and strategic alliances with regulatory agencies and legal organizations that specialized in protecting minority businesses from exactly the kind of sophisticated theft they'd been planning. "You can't prove our intentions were illegal." Blackstone protested his legal training, searching for defenses that might limit their exposure to criminal and civil liability for attempted corporate theft. Tasha's laugh was confident and devastating as she produced additional documents that revealed the extent of her intelligence gathering and legal preparation. "Gentlemen, I've been documenting attempted acquisitions of minority-owned businesses for 3 years, working with federal agencies that are very interested in patterns of predatory behavior that target successful companies based on their owners' racial and ethnic backgrounds. The revelation that their attempted theft was part of larger investigation into systematic predatory practices targeting minority businesses transformed their individual legal exposure into potential federal criminal charges that could result in prison sentences and complete destruction of their careers and personal wealth. Sterling's empire had been built on acquiring other people's achievements through legal manipulation and financial pressure that had never been challenged by victims who lacked resources or strategic capabilities necessary to expose and resist sophisticated theft. But Tasha represented a different kind of target, someone with resources, intelligence, and preparation that turned their predatory strategies into career-ending mistakes. "What we discussed today," Chen said desperately, "it was just preliminary business analysis. Nothing that would justify federal investigation or criminal charges." Tasha's response revealed the completeness of their strategic defeat and her preparation for exactly this kind of damage control attempt. "Your preliminary business analysis included plans to file frivolous lawsuits, manipulate regulatory agencies, and create artificial financial crises to force below-market acquisition of assets worth over $1 billion. Federal prosecutors call that conspiracy fraud and attempted theft on a scale that carries significant prison sentences. The meeting's conclusion was swift and decisive. Sterling's team fled the conference room like retreating soldiers. Their attempted acquisition transformed into career-threatening exposure that would require extensive legal representation and damage control to prevent criminal prosecution and civil liability that could destroy their personal wealth and professional reputations. Tasha remained in the conference room reviewing documents that confirmed the complete failure of their attempted theft, while processing satisfaction that came from strategic victory over opponents who'd underestimated her based on racial prejudices that had prevented them from recognizing her intelligence resources and preparation for exactly the kind of predatory attack they'd orchestrated. The Waitress uniform had provided perfect camouflage for intelligence operations that had exceeded anything professional corporate intelligence services could have achieved through conventional surveillance and investigation methods. By becoming invisible through service work performance, she'd gained access to confidential conversations and strategic planning that had revealed every aspect of their attempted theft. But more importantly, the experience had confirmed that success in business came from superior preparation, strategic thinking, and operational excellence, rather than racial advantages or systematic theft that had built Sterling's empire through acquiring other people's achievements rather than creating value through innovation and customer service. The aftermath of the failed acquisition attempt created ripple effects throughout Boston's business community as news spread about Sterling's strategic defeat and the sophisticated intelligence operations that had exposed his predatory practices to federal investigation. Williams Industries' stock price rose 20% as investors recognized the company's strength and management capabilities that had successfully defended against professional acquisition specialists. Tasha's reputation was enhanced rather than damaged by the confrontation business leaders who'd previously viewed her success with skepticism now understood that she possessed strategic capabilities that exceeded those of established players who'd built careers on manipulation rather than excellence. The federal investigation into predatory acquisition practices targeting minority businesses expanded to include dozens of cases where similar tactics had been used to steal or destroy companies whose success had challenged assumptions about who deserved to control serious wealth and market influence. Sterling's empire began collapsing as regulatory scrutiny revealed patterns of fraudulent business practices that had been disguised as legitimate acquisitions, but actually represented systematic theft from entrepreneurs who'd lacked resources or strategic capabilities necessary to expose and resist sophisticated legal manipulation. 6 months after the conference room confrontation, Tasha testified before Congress about predatory practices that targeted minority-owned businesses. Her experience with Sterling providing case study for legislative reforms that would protect successful entrepreneurs from exactly the kind of sophisticated theft that had been disguised as legitimate business competition. The Waitress uniform that had made her invisible was displayed in her office as reminder of the strategic advantages that came from being underestimated by opponents who confused racial prejudice with strategic intelligence. The costume had provided access to conversations and decision-making that conventional business intelligence could never have achieved. Standing in her corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Williams Industries continuing to exceed performance projections while expanding into new markets and creating thousands of jobs, Tasha reflected on how completely the tables had turned from that conference room confrontation. The men who'd called her just the help had discovered that the help was actually the boss, not just of her own billion-dollar company, but of strategic intelligence operations that had exposed their attempted theft to law enforcement agencies that were now investigating their entire business model for patterns of fraud and manipulation. The black waitress who'd served them wine while they'd plotted her destruction had signed the papers that sent them to federal prison, while her company continued growing into one of the most successful logistics operations in American business history, proving that true power came from building rather than stealing, from excellence rather than manipulation, and from strategic intelligence rather than racial prejudice disguised as business acumen. The billionaire boss had been hiding in plain sight, serving wine while gathering evidence that would transform their predatory confidence into criminal liability, their attempted theft into career destruction, and their assumptions about racial superiority into federal cases that would be studied in business schools as examples of how prejudice could blind successful people to dangers that would destroy everything they'd built through systematic theft rather than legitimate achievement.